The first thing I remember is the way the hostess's smile faltered when Ethan stepped past the brass revolving door, all silver light and swagger like a camera flash had grown legs and learned to strut. Conversations thinned to a hush that wasn't quite silence, forks held midair as if the room inhaled at once. I felt the weight of my mother's hand on a water glass across the room, steady but white-knuckled, the stem threatening to snap. The waiter was already drifting our direction, with a polite reminder about coverage, a word that landed between us like a dropped plate. Ethan tipped his chin and grinned at me, pleased at the attention, pleased at himself, pleased that the world had paused to look. Somewhere behind that grin, I heard the softest cracking sound, like a hairline fracture you can't see yet in the porcelain. In that moment, I realized the night wasn't just about my sister's new white coat. It was about what happened when someone refused to take theirs off. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and if you've ever watched a family try to keep the peace while one person made a spectacle of themselves, leave a comment and tap like and subscribe. So more of these true stories find the people who need them. My name is Christine Phillips, 27. Raised in a South Jersey house where you brought a casserole to every milestone, wrote thank you notes by hand, and never arrived somewhere in a way that stole the moment from someone else. My mother has the patience of a lifelong principal and the memory for every kid's spelling word, and my father's hands have built porches for half the neighborhood. I grew up believing a good life was made of small dignities stacked day after day. I went to state school, learned to make spreadsheets behave, and found a job that pays the rent on time. It isn't glamorous, but it's mine. For a long time, I thought steadiness was dull, right up until I learned how precious it is when the alternative is a storm. Ethan breezed into my life at a friend's rooftop party last spring. Precise jawline clothes that caught light like water, and a laugh that made people turn their heads. He spoke fluent trend. What color would replace lavender? Which shoe would die next year? Why certain seams made you feel taller, and the confidence felt intoxicating. Like a perfume you don't recognize but can't stop breathing. I told myself we balanced each other, my quiet his spark, my planning his plunge. He texted good morning selfies and took me to pop-ups I'd never heard of. I introduced him to my favorite diner at the edge of town where the waitress calls you hun and pours coffee before you sit. If we felt like opposites, it also felt like possibility. My family liked him in the way you like a guest who is all charm on a first visit. My mother asked careful questions. My father cracked 2 jokes to test his sense of humor, and my sisters exchanged looks that said we'll see. Grace is the kind who can read a tax return like tea leaves, and Bethany has always been quiet, lightning soft voice, unshakable will. We were raised on fairness more than rules, though rules helped. We were taught that a celebration belongs to the person at the center, the way a ring belongs to the finger it fits. Ethan nodded along to all of this, but seemed to treat it like local folklore, quaint, decorative, optional. The month Bethany matched for residency, my mother booked a table downtown where the lighting turns the room warm and everyone's posture improves without noticing. She asked us to dress formal, because some occasions deserve that kind of softness, and I passed the message to Ethan the way you pass salt, simple, neutral, necessary. He kissed my forehead and said, "Got it?" Then added something about showing up for big moments, and I believed him because I wanted to. A dress code felt like the least of the asks, and anyway, I trusted him to care about what I cared about when it mattered. We were good on ordinary days. We made eggs on Sundays and argued about whether to fold towels in thirds or halves, shared earbuds on train rides, and took turns choosing movies. He teased me about owning exactly one navy dress that I dragged from weddings to interviews, and I teased him for needing a mirror with every doorway. It was a rhythm that worked so long as the stakes were low. When the stakes rose even a little, I began noticing how quickly he shifted the light back to himself. How attention fed him the way sleep feeds a toddler. I kept smoothing the edges in my mind, calling it style, calling it youth, calling it anything but what it was. The afternoon of the dinner, I laid my dress out on the bed and pressed steam into a neckline I've worn to more beginnings than I can count. Ethan emerged with 3 garment bags and that grin that means he's planning a reveal, and I felt my stomach flutter in a way that wasn't quite nerves and wasn't quite joy. I reminded him gently about the restaurant policy, about Bethany, about how much this meant, and he kissed the air beside my cheek and told me not to worry. In the car, he angled his phone toward the window to catch the last light and captioned a story about celebrating wins, and for one long stoplight, I pretended that's exactly what we were about to do. When the valet opened my door, the city smelled like rain on hot concrete, and I could see my mother's silhouette through the glass, the exact tilt of her chin. That means she's holding a smile in place for the sake of the room. Ethan adjusted his cuff and nodded at his reflection, and I felt the smallest draft of air as the door swung wide. The hostess lifted her eyes, saw us, and blinked once, in that way people do when they're trying to be gracious faster than they're surprised. I smoothed the front of my dress and reached for the handle, a little prayer in my throat that the night would be about my sister and the family who raised us to make room for other people's joy. Then the revolving door eased us into the glow, and every face began to turn. The restaurant's air was cool, the kind of expensive chill that carried hints of citrus and candle wax, and the sound of silver against china usually floated softly through the room. That night, though, the moment Ethan stepped in, everything tightened. His suit threw back light like a mirror ball cropped so short his ribs showed beneath the opening. No shirt at all. 6-inch boots struck the marble floor, each step louder than conversation, and heads turned before he even reached the table. My breath locked in my throat, knowing at once this wasn't confidence, it was provocation. We approached the table slowly, and I caught my mother's eyes first. Her smile froze into something porcelain, the corners stiff with effort. My father tilted his chin to his water glass, as though studying reflections, his thumb circling the rim without drinking. Grace leaned close to her husband, whispering words meant for no one else, and Bethany's lips parted but never moved. The pride that had shone so bright in her all week dimmed as her gaze fixed on the hollow shine of Ethan's suit. I wanted to apologize before we even sat down, but no one spoke quickly enough to fill the silence. "Hi, everyone," Ethan announced, pitching his voice across the table as though stepping onto a stage. Traffic was insane. He said it with a laugh, though we weren't late, and pulled out his chair with a flourish. The waiter appeared almost instantly, too quickly to be chance. His hands clasped behind his back, his smile strained. "Welcome to Crescendo. May I remind you of our dress code?" He spoke carefully, not unkind, but clear. Ethan tipped his head back and laughed, the sound sharp against the hush. "This suit cost $4,000. You're really going to talk to me about policy?" The waiter's hands didn't move, though his smile thinned. "Appropriate coverage is required for all guests, sir." The silence broke into ripples of discomfort. Aunt Linda, already flushed from the wine, drained her glass in one long swallow. Grace's eyes flickered over to Bethany, whose hands trembled slightly as she lifted her water. My mother leaned forward, her voice gentle. "Ethan, perhaps one of the shawls would be nice. It's chilly in here." She was offering him an escape, a way to fold dignity back into the room. "I'm not wearing some communal rag," he snapped, his voice carrying. I felt my stomach turn heat, climbing my neck, the night unraveling before it had begun. "Ethan, please," I murmured, keeping my tone low, hoping only he would hear. His eyes shot toward me, blazing. "Are you taking their side?" The words were sharp, meant to pierce. I swallowed hard. "There aren't sides. It's just the rules." His chair scraped back against the marble louder than any voice. He rose broad in his metallic shine and declared, "This is ridiculous. I'm being shamed for expressing myself." Bethany's voice broke softly. No one's shaming you. We just want to celebrate. He turned toward her, then his smile twisting into a sneer. Oh, so now the golden child speaks. Must be nice having everyone worship you. The room froze solid. Even dishes in the kitchen seemed to quiet. My chest tightened, hearing the cruelty in his words aimed at my sister, the one person who had worked harder than anyone for her moment. Bethany's cheeks paled, her lips parting without sound, but her eyes remained steady. I pushed my chair back, my hand trembling, but my voice clear. We're leaving. He whipped his head toward me, incredulous. I'm not going anywhere. I haven't even ordered. My heart pounded so hard, I thought the sound might echo. Then find your own way home, I said. My mother studied her menu, refusing to lift her eyes, and my father scrolled absently through his phone, as if the pages there could carry him elsewhere. No one rescued him. No one rescued me either. We were left with our choices. Ethan looked around the table, waiting for a defense that never came. When the silence answered, his lips curled into a scowl. Fine. This family is toxic anyway. He snatched up the tiny silver clutch he had carried in one manicured hand and stormed out, boots clanging like cymbals on marble. His shadow lingered after he left, the sound of the revolving door fading into the hum of the city. I turned toward Bethany, my throat tight. I'm so sorry, I whispered. This was supposed to be your night. Her gaze met mine softer now, her voice quiet but sure. Christine, sit down. He made his choice. You don't have to follow him. For the first time in months, calm spread through me like water finding its level. I sank into my chair as Grace's husband signaled the waiter for wine. The table resumed its breath-soft laughter, returning a sparkler set into cake toasts, raised with voices steady again. We leaned back into celebration, trying to erase the sharp edge he had carved into the evening. But the truth pressed in like a draft through a cracked window. Ethan's need to perform wasn't just a quirk or a habit. It was a hunger that devoured every moment, even those that weren't his. Later, when the last of the cake plates had been cleared, and my family's laughter softened into stories about childhood pranks and exam nights, I caught sight of my mother's face. Her smile reached her eyes again, though faint lines of strain remained. She had fought for the night to stay whole, and somehow she had managed it. But I knew what it had cost. Bethany's shoulders had straightened. Her voice had steadied, but the memory of his words, golden child worship, hung in the air, even as candles burned lower. I carried them with me, tucked in the folds of my dress, as surely as I carried my car keys. By the time I slipped back into the night, the perfume of the restaurant clinging to my clothes, I knew something with Ethan had shifted beyond repair. He hadn't embarrassed only himself. He had tried to wound my sister to strike the place in our family where pride lived. It was no longer about sequins or dress codes. It was about the ease with which he made someone else's moment his own. As we drove home, the silence between us was heavy. No music, no chatter, only the faint click of his phone as he scrolled through his gallery of self-portraits. He smiled at his own reflection in the window, and I stared ahead, wondering when exactly I had mistaken hunger for confidence. That night, as I laid my dress across the back of a chair and unpinned my hair, the apartment walls felt closer than before. The silence wasn't restful. It pressed thick and heavy, reminding me of how easily Ethan had turned the evening sour. I thought of Bethany's trembling hands, of my father's bowed head, of my mother's frozen smile. I thought of the pause that had swept through the room the instant Ethan entered, as though his shine had stolen the air itself. For the first time, I wondered if silence, the tool I had been using for months, was enough anymore. When I closed my eyes, I could still hear the scrape of his chair, his voice carrying over the table, his words aimed like knives at my sister. And beneath that, I felt something shift deep inside me. Not anger, yet not a plan, but the faintest awareness that the fracture I had heard was spreading. What had cracked in the restaurant was not just the evening. It was the foundation of what I had with Ethan, and though it hadn't yet collapsed, I knew it would. The apartment was quiet when I walked through the door, that kind of quiet that feels heavier than sound. My dress still carried a trace of the restaurant's perfume, but the air inside was flat and still. I looked automatically toward the bowl near the door, where Ethan always dropped his key. The space was empty, and in its place lay a folded note. The words were short, sharp, and final. "Don't bother calling. You showed your true colors tonight." I set it down on the counter, my hand trembling slightly, though no tears came. Instead, a hollow weight settled in my chest, the kind that lingers long after the noise is gone. I changed slowly out of my dress, slipping into cotton pajamas, the fabric rougher than usual against my skin. When I lay down, the silence pressed like a weight against my ribs. My phone buzzed once, then again, then over and over, until the vibration hummed through the nightstand. At first, the texts were small stings. "You abandoned me. Your family is classist. That restaurant discriminated against me." Then the words grew sharper, faster, tumbling in like hail against a roof. "You humiliated me. You should have defended me. Are you seriously not going to apologize?" My screen lit up again and again, his anger pouring through every line. I pressed the phone face down, the light still bleeding through the wood beneath it, and tried to breathe through the storm of words I wasn't reading. The night stretched long, each minute sticky with unease. I rolled from side to side, listening for any sound beyond the hum of the refrigerator or the settling creak of the pipes. My mind replayed Bethany's expression at the restaurant, the way her voice had trembled and then steadied, as if she had found a strength I hadn't seen before. I thought of her eyes meeting mine, telling me I didn't have to follow him. That memory held me steady through the rest of the night, even as Ethan's words crawled across my thoughts. By the time the first gray light seeped through the blinds, I had already decided not to answer him. Silence was my only shield. Evening came again, and with it, a knock at the door. My heart jumped hard against my chest. I opened it, and Ethan brushed past me without waiting, his silver bag slung over his shoulder, like he owned the air in my apartment. Jada trailed behind him, eyeliner-sharp arms crossed, eyes already judging. "You humiliated me," Ethan snapped before the door even clicked shut. His voice was rehearsed, as though he had practiced the speech on the drive over. "You left me standing there looking like a fool in front of your snobby family." His words hit fast and hot, each one meant to leave a mark. I steadied my breath before answering. "You humiliated yourself, Ethan," I said, my tone, even though my hands trembled at my sides. "And worse, you tried to turn my sister's night into your stage." His eyes widened as if the thought itself was absurd. "I didn't know it was that big a deal," he shot back, his voice sharp with disbelief. "I told you. My mom told you. Even the restaurant told you," I replied, my voice firmer now. Jada's arms folded tighter across her chest. "You could have been clearer," she cut in, her tone sharp. "If you knew about the dress code, why didn't you stop him?" I turned toward her, steady but tired. "I told him it was formal. He said he wasn't a child. He told me he knew how to dress himself." She tilted her chin. "That's not the same." My voice rose, steadier now. "It's exactly the same." Ethan's jaw tightened, frustration seeping past the polish of his expression. His eyes glistened not with tears, but with a rage that made him look almost fragile. "You're so controlling, Christine. You probably wanted this to happen." The words landed like a stone in my chest, but something inside me shifted. Not anger, not sorrow, but a clarity that felt sudden and solid. "No," I said softly. "I wanted to celebrate my sister." "You wanted attention, and you got it. Congratulations." He blinked at me, confusion flickering through his anger. "So what?" "You're ending things." The question hung heavy in the room. "Yes," I answered. The word fell sharp and final like the sound of a lock sliding into place. His lips curled, his voice cracking. "You'll regret this," maybe I said, quietly. "But at least I'll regret it in peace." Jada shifted, her glare no longer sharp, her discomfort clear. Ethan grabbed the small pile of his belongings, shirts, sneakers, his grooming kit, and shoved them into his silver bag. He looked around the apartment one last time, waiting maybe for me to beg. I stayed still. "Fine," he spat. "You don't deserve me." My voice was calm, almost gentle. "Probably not." Jada's eyes softened for the briefest moment as she glanced at me, then she followed him out. The door slammed behind them, the sound echoing off the walls, until only silence remained. The quiet that followed was heavy, but different. The apartment felt larger somehow, the room's mine again. I sank onto the couch, my body sagging with exhaustion, my chest oddly light. A part of me wanted to cry to break, but instead, I just breathed long and slow, as if learning again how to fill my lungs. For the first time in months, the air around me wasn't borrowed. It was mine. The next week unfolded strangely. The apartment stayed quiet, and I filled it with music I hadn't played in ages. I met old friends for coffee, laughing until my stomach ached, remembering what it felt like to be seen without someone elbowing for the spotlight. On Thursday, I joined a casual volleyball game at a community center. My laughter rose sharp and surprised, the kind that bends you over and leaves your eyes watering. For a moment, I let myself believe maybe Ethan had disappeared into some new distraction, licking his wounds elsewhere. The thought carried me through the evening steady and hopeful. But Friday morning, the call came. "Ms. Phillips, this is Detective Alvarez with the fraud unit. We need to confirm some charges attempted on your credit card." My stomach dropped, the words sticking in my throat. "What charges?" He cleared his throat. $4,000 in designer clothing shipped to an apartment under the name Jada Williams. My knees weakened, the phone pressed harder against my ear. Ethan hadn't left quietly. He had taken a piece of me with him, and now he was trying to turn it into gold. My hand shook as I wrote down the case number, the detective's calm voice grounding me. "We'll be in touch, Miss Phillips." I hung up, staring at the phone as if it might burn through the table. That evening, I gathered the receipts, canceled the card, called the bank, and filed the report. The practical steps filled the hours, but beneath them ran the sharp truth. He wasn't finished with me. He wasn't ready to release his grip. As I sat at my kitchen table, paperwork spread before me, the last light of the day casting long shadows across the floor, I realized something deeper. Silence wouldn't be enough this time. This wasn't just about ending a relationship. This was about defending myself against someone who refused to let go. And as night fell and the street lamps flickered on, I knew the storm wasn't over. It was only beginning to gather. The following Monday morning, I sat at my desk with a half-empty cup of coffee, trying to push through spreadsheets that blurred together when the email landed. The subject line carried my name, bold and accusatory: outstanding compensation, Christine Phillips. My heart stumbled as I clicked it open. The message wasn't only sent to me. My boss, our HR manager, and even my mother's work address were all copied. Ethan's words filled the page like a mockery of formality. Christine, you owe me $50,000 for the year and a half I invested in our relationship. He had even attached an invoice broken down into line items: relationship management, $15,000, emotional support, $10,000, event planning, $7,000. Each absurd number carried his arrogance, but the weight of the recipients made my cheeks burn hot. I barely had time to steady my breath before my boss's office door opened. "Christine," he said, his tone careful. "Can we talk?" Inside, he turned the screen toward me. Ethan's invoice glared from the monitor. "What exactly am I looking at?" he asked, pinching the bridge of his nose. "My ex-boyfriend," I said quietly. "He's creative." My boss let out a long breath, fighting a smile. "Creative is one word. HR will have to document it, but you're not in trouble. Just Christine, maybe get a restraining order." Relief loosened the knot in my chest, but shame still stung. I walked back to my desk, my pulse heavy in my ears. Waiting on my phone was another message, this time from Mom. "Sweetheart, did you see this?" "Don't worry," I already replied. My stomach twisted as I opened the thread. She had hit reply all. Her words were calm, sharp, and devastating in their precision. "Thank you for your invoice, Ethan. I've prepared my own. Ruining Bethany's graduation dinner, $5,000. Therapy for family after witnessing your behavior, $3,000. Dry cleaning for restaurant shawl you called gross, $50. Teaching my daughter to recognize red flags, priceless." I pressed a hand to my mouth, laughter spilling out despite everything. For the first time since this all began, I felt lighter. My co-workers peeked curiously over their cubicles at the sound, but I didn't care. My mother had turned his game into a mirror, showing him what he truly was. But Ethan didn't retreat. 2 nights later, my neighbor, Mrs. Guerrero, called me. Her voice carried a mix of concern and dry humor. "Christine, honey, there's a young man knocking on doors here asking which apartment is yours. Says he's your fiancé. Wants to know where you live. Should I call the police?" My breath hitched. "Yes, please," I whispered. She chuckled grimly. "Already did. And for your amusement, he's wearing a shiny gold jumpsuit on a Tuesday." I closed my eyes, the tension winding tighter. By the time I got home, the officers had escorted him away. He had told them I stole his grandmother's ring, though everyone knew he barely spoke to her. The lies were piling faster now, stacking one over another, flimsy but dangerous in their intent. The next morning, I found the first real scar. A long, jagged scratch ran the length of my car, silver paint curling at the edges. My knees nearly gave out as I crouched beside it. In the garage office, the manager replayed footage from the cameras. There was Ethan crouched like a shadow, dragging his keys across the metal in the middle of the night, dressed in yet another metallic jacket, this one, bronze. Detective Alvarez played the recording again in his office, the glow of the screen washing over us. "Ms. Phillips," he said carefully, "this is escalating. Fraud, harassment, vandalism. You need to file for a restraining order." I gripped the strap of my purse so tightly it cut into my hand. For months, my family had swallowed discomfort to keep the peace. But this time, the cost was mine, and I couldn't ignore it. At home, the family group chat was alive with Mom's email reply screenshots, passing between cousins and aunt's emojis trailing behind. Aunt Linda wrote, "Your mom is savage," followed by a string of laughing faces. Bethany's message came more quietly. "Please be careful. He doesn't seem stable." Her words carried more weight than all the laughter. She knew, as I did, that beneath the absurd outfits and grand gestures lived something darker. The humor was armor, but it couldn't shield me from what he was capable of. That Thursday evening, Mrs. Guerrero called again. "Christine, darling, he's back. Still telling neighbors you're engaged. Now he says you're pregnant with his child." "Should I call the police again?" I pressed a hand to my forehead. "Yes," I managed. She sniffed. "Already did. And for the record, he's wearing silver hot pants. On a Thursday." Even through my fear, I let out a weak laugh. Her voice, calm and matter-of-fact, steadied me more than she knew. But the image of him in my hallway, knocking on doors with lies pouring from his mouth, left my stomach knotted long after. By the next morning, my car was no longer just scratched. It was ruined. Gouges dug deep into the hood mirrors, kicked-in tires slashed flat. A sticky note flapped under the wiper with 4 chilling words: "You made me do this." I sank against the garage wall, my breath-shallow vision blurring at the edges. This wasn't about clothes anymore or attention. This was punishment. I called Mom through tears, and she answered on the second ring, her voice brisk, steady, and grounding. "Sweetheart," she said firmly, "this is not your shame to carry. He's showing everyone who he is. You are going to protect yourself. Do you hear me?" I nodded, though she couldn't see. "Yes." She didn't hesitate. "I'll call our lawyer. Bethany's already speaking with a colleague at her hospital, someone who handles domestic cases. We're not letting him terrorize you." That night, Bethany texted me quietly. "I'm sorry he's dragging you through this, but I'm proud of you. You walked away. You stood up to him. I couldn't at dinner, but you did." I stared at her words, warmth spreading through me, even against the chill of fear. She was right. For once I had refused to bend myself into Ethan's performance. But as I set the phone down, I knew walking away wasn't enough anymore. I had to close the curtain on his show for good. And as I lay awake, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, my body tense beneath the covers, one thought stayed with me. Silence had been my shield, but now silence wasn't safety. The time had come to fight back. Filing for the restraining order felt like stepping into another world, one made of affidavits, evidence binders, and fluorescent-lit hallways. My hands shook as I signed the papers at the courthouse, each stroke of the pen pressing the truth deeper into reality. This wasn't just a breakup anymore. It was a record, a boundary written into law. I clutched the folder of documents, the weight of them heavier than any purse I had ever carried. Detective Alvarez met me at the courthouse steps, his voice calm but firm. "Given the fraud, the harassment, and now the vandalism, the judge will almost certainly grant the emergency order," he said. "It will protect you until the full hearing." The word "protected" felt strange in my ears, like a blanket I wasn't sure I deserved. I nodded, though my throat ached with unspoken fear. As I walked out into the afternoon light, the sky seemed too wide, too ordinary for what I was carrying inside. The day of the hearing, I dressed carefully, choosing the same navy dress I had worn to Bethany's dinner, the one that still carried faint memories of perfume and candlelight. My palms were damp against the clutch as I walked into the courtroom, the walls tall and stern, the air cool and unyielding. My lawyer, a colleague of Bethany's friend from the hospital, leaned close and whispered, "Just breathe. You're not alone." I sat back straight, waiting for the man I once let into my life to enter. When Ethan appeared, the room shifted. He wore a metallic gold pantsuit that shimmered under the fluorescent lights, his hair styled with defiance, his chin tipped high. The courtroom rippled with suppressed laughter, a bailiff raising an eyebrow before quickly schooling his face. My stomach turned, not because of the spectacle, but because even here, even now, he thought it was a stage. He looked around the room, waiting for eyes to follow, mistaking attention for victory. The judge, a man with steel gray hair and glasses perched low, adjusted the file in front of him. "Mr. Walsh," he said evenly, "you are contesting the restraining order." Ethan puffed his chest. "Yes, Your Honor. I am the victim here. Christine emotionally abused me by refusing to guide me socially. She set me up to fail at her family dinner." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The judge blinked dry and unimpressed. "Set you up?" How Ethan leaned forward, his voice rising. "She didn't tell me exactly what to wear. She knew the restaurant had a dress code. She wanted me to embarrass myself." The silence that followed was thick disbelief hanging heavy in the air. The judge removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "So your argument is that she abused you by not dressing you?" His tone was flat. His patience stretched thin. "That is not abuse. That is you making poor choices." My lawyer pressed my arm gently, her eyes urging me to stay steady. I bit the inside of my cheek, holding back a laugh that trembled dangerously close to tears. Ethan's face flushed, his lips tightening, but the judge had already turned to the folder of evidence. Page by page, the judge flipped through screenshots of Ethan's late-night texts, the fraudulent credit card charges, the absurd invoice he had sent to my workplace, photographs of the car he had keyed, and police reports from the building. Each detail painted the picture I had lived, one line at a time. When the judge closed the folder, his decision came with finality. Based on the evidence, the court grants a permanent restraining order. "Mr. Walsh, you are to remain at least 500 feet away from Ms. Phillips, her home, her workplace, and her family members. Any violation will result in immediate arrest." Ethan sputtered, his mouth opening and closing, but his lawyer tugged firmly at his sleeve. For once, he stayed silent. The gavel struck, and the sound echoed sharp and final. As I walked out of the courtroom, sunlight spilled across the tall windows. And for the first time in months, my chest loosened, my breath flowing freely. The air outside felt cleaner, as though the city itself had exhaled with me. Yet even in that relief, a shadow lingered. I knew Ethan and I knew boundaries only made him push harder. That night, curled on my couch, I scrolled back through his old messages, the accusations, the gaslighting, the threats laced as promises. Each line reminded me of the storm I had escaped. But storms don't vanish. They move. They circle. They wait for cracks. I told myself the paper was strong enough to hold him back, but deep down, I wasn't sure. I turned off my phone and sat in the quiet, my hands folded in my lap, the silence no longer a weight, but not yet a comfort either. Word spread quickly after the hearing. Ethan hadn't just lost, he had been silenced, and for a man who lived off attention, silence was worse than punishment. The restraining order became the talk of extended family chats. Mom's earlier clapback email passed around again for laughs, but the seriousness never left me. His theatrics had reached a court, and the law itself had told him no. I should have felt safe. Instead, I felt the quiet hum of unease beneath my skin waiting. The week that followed was strangely calm. I cooked meals without glancing at the door, slept longer without waking to phantom buzzing, walked to my car without finding new damage. Yet every time my phone lit up, my stomach clenched, even though his number was blocked. The trauma didn't care about paperwork, and it didn't care about distance. It lived in the pauses, the waiting, the fear of what might come next. I carried it with me like a shadow, unseen, but always present. One evening, Bethany texted me simply, "I know it still feels raw, Christine, but I'm proud of you. You saw through him faster than I could have. You chose yourself." I read her words again and again, letting them seep into me like warmth on cold skin. Choosing myself hadn't been easy. It had been quiet, painful, and steady. But for the first time in a long while, I knew I wasn't just surviving him anymore. I was beginning to stand apart from him. Still, even as I folded her message into memory, I couldn't shake one thought. Ethan's ego wasn't built to fade. He would claw at any spotlight he could find, even in ruin. And though the judge had silenced him, I felt sure I hadn't seen the last of him. The weeks after the restraining order should have been peaceful, but instead, they revealed how quickly Ethan's carefully built world was beginning to crack. My lawyer called one gray Tuesday morning, his tone brisk but edged with satisfaction. "Christine, you'll want to know this. The DA is moving forward on the fraud and vandalism charges. He's facing multiple counts, plus contempt, after his outburst at court." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, picturing Ethan pacing somewhere dressed in another metallic outfit, trying to convince himself the world still owed him an audience. Only now, the stage was the legal system, and no one was clapping. Word spread quickly, not just through my family, but through his professional life. Ethan's agency thrived on curated images, sleek campaigns, and clients who measured success in polish. When they discovered he had used his company email to send me that absurd $50,000 invoice copies plastered across HR and my boss, they didn't see creativity. They saw liability. Within days, he was out his once glossy career, reduced to filtered selfies captioned with vague lines about rising above negativity. The comments were sparse, polite confusion mixed with silence. Without an audience, he seemed smaller, though I knew better than to believe he would stay quiet for long. Meanwhile, I began piecing my own life back together. I signed a lease on a new apartment across town, one with better locks, a staffed lobby, and no shared garage. When I told Mrs. Guerrero, she hugged me tightly in the hallway, pressing a handwritten list into my hand. "These are good neighbors," she said firmly. "Nice people, no shiny boys." I laughed for the first time in weeks, real laughter that didn't crack in my chest. Packing boxes became more than a chore. It felt like reclaiming space that had always belonged to me. Each item folded and taped away felt lighter once it was separated from him. Family dinners shifted too. The air around the table wasn't tight with silence anymore. Bethany, freed from the grind of exams, glowed with the joy she had earned. Grace teased me gently, asking if she should vet my next boyfriend's wardrobe before introductions. Even my father, usually quiet, muttered, "At least the food will stay hot this Thanksgiving." My mother, eyes sparkling, added, "As long as there are no metallic interruptions." Laughter carried through the dining room, warm and unbroken. For the first time in a long while, I sat at that table without feeling like something was waiting to collapse. Yet even in that light, shadows lingered. Each time my phone buzzed, my stomach clenched, though I knew his number was blocked. Trauma doesn't care about legal boundaries. It lives in the pauses, in the waiting, in the quiet moments when you let your guard slip. Late at night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how many masks I had mistaken for confidence. I thought of the way he used to stride into every room, how I had convinced myself it was fearlessness, when really it was hunger gnawing and endless. The difference was so clear now, but the clarity carried its own sting. One evening, Bethany texted me out of nowhere. "I know it still feels raw, Christine, but I'm proud of you. You saw through him faster than I could have. You chose yourself." Her words were like balm, steady and quiet. Choosing myself hadn't been a single moment. It had been dozens of small decisions to stay seated when he stormed out, to ignore his accusations, to file the papers when fear said, "Don't." Reading her message, I realized that each choice had pulled me back to solid ground away from the quicksand of his performance. For once, the reflection I saw in my own life wasn't his. It was mine. Still, the outside world hadn't forgotten him. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard he had retreated into social media, posting moody photos captioned with lines about karma and strength. His followers dwindled, his shine dimming without the constant praise. I saw one screenshot passed along in a group chat, him staring into a mirror with the caption, "Sometimes the universe tests you with toxic people." The irony would have been funny if it weren't so tragic. But it wasn't my problem anymore. My focus was on the smaller, brighter things. Coffee with Bethany after her first week as a resident, laughter with Grace over her toddler's latest antics, sitting on the porch with Mom while she knit in the fading light. Even so, unease still traced the edges of my days. The restraining order was firm, the charges stacked against him, but I knew Ethan. Silence was never his language. Attention was. And though the courts had taken his microphone, he would keep searching for another stage. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, that restless pull of someone who refuses to fade. As I unpacked the last box in my new apartment, the city lights glowing through the window, I told myself I was ready. The curtain on his show had been lowered, but the encore I feared had not yet begun. The call came early on a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray day where the sky pressed low over the city. My lawyer's voice was steady, though I caught a note of quiet satisfaction underneath. "Christine, the DA has finalized the plea agreement. Ethan accepted it. He's avoiding a trial, but he'll have probation, restitution, and mandatory classes. He'll be covering the fraudulent charges, damages to your car, and he's been ordered into anger management." I sat at my kitchen table with the phone pressed to my ear, the news settling into me like a tide coming in slow but certain. For months, he had chased attention with glitter and noise, convinced rules bent for him. Now the law itself had stripped away the spotlight. I asked quietly, anger management. My lawyer chuckled under his breath. "Yes, and business casual dress code. No sequins or metallics allowed." The absurdity of it broke something loose in me. I laughed until tears filled my eyes, laughter that carried not bitterness, but release. The image of Ethan slouched in khakis, forced to breathe through his own rage, while a clock ticked in the background, was the kind of justice I hadn't dared imagine. It wasn't dramatic. It was humbling. And it was exactly what he could never perform his way out of. In the weeks that followed, the consequences settled around him like ash after a fire. Word spread that his agency had blacklisted him, clients quietly withdrawing from projects he had once bragged about. The endless selfies dwindled to occasional filtered shots paired with vague captions about new beginnings and toxic people who test your strength. Friends who had once hovered near him drifted away, unwilling to be pulled into the wreckage. I watched it from a distance, not with glee, but with the calm certainty that justice had shifted the balance. His collapse wasn't mine to orchestrate. It was simply the truth catching up. My life, in contrast, began to expand again. I unpacked the last boxes in my new apartment, stacking books onto shelves and folding sweaters into drawers without the feeling that another hand would rearrange them. The building was quiet, steady, filled with neighbors who nodded kindly in the elevator and held the door without prying questions. Mrs. Guerrero called once just to check in, her voice warm with pride. "You sound lighter," she told me. And she was right. The silence in my home no longer pressed against my chest. It breathed with me, roomy and forgiving. Family dinners regained their rhythm too. Bethany sat straighter now, her exhaustion softened by the pride of beginning residency. Grace teased me about bringing someone new home for the holidays, laughing when I rolled my eyes. Even my father, who rarely wasted words, leaned back in his chair and muttered, "Well, at least the food will stay hot this year." My mother, with a glint in her eye, added, "As long as there are no metallic interruptions." Laughter rose from the table, warm and unbroken, the memory of that disastrous night finally loosening its grip. For the first time in months, the sound of family wasn't muffled by tension. It was whole. Still, some nights carried shadows. My phone would buzz with an unknown number, and my breath would catch before I silenced it. Trauma doesn't leave neatly, not even with paperwork and a gavel strike. It lingers in the pauses, in the imagined footsteps in a hallway, in the fear of cracks, where storms might creep back in. But each time, I reminded myself of the order, the charges, the distance the law had carved. I was not unprotected. I was not alone. Bethany's messages steadied me most. Late one evening, as I curled on the couch with the blanket pulled around my shoulders, she texted, "He tried to take your peace, but you chose yourself instead. That's something he'll never understand." Her words sank deep, a quiet truth I carried with me. Choosing myself had been a series of small, trembling steps, but together they had built something stronger than any spectacle he could stage. One afternoon, walking through my neighborhood, I passed a cafe window and caught my reflection. For months, I had looked and seen only weariness, shadows under my eyes, shoulders drawn tight. But that day, I saw steadiness. My face was the same, but my posture was different, grounded, no longer bent around someone else's hunger for attention. I paused, studying the woman in the glass. She wasn't someone's stagehand anymore. She was herself, entire and unbroken. The news of Ethan's plea deal rippled through family conversations like a final chapter. Mom, never one to waste the chance for humor, asked during Sunday dinner, "Do you think the restraining order applies to Thanksgiving?" Grace's husband laughed, raising his glass. Bethany reached across the table to squeeze my hand, her eyes soft. In that moment, surrounded by laughter and steady love, I knew justice wasn't always about spectacle. Sometimes it was simply about seeing the truth laid bare and stepping forward without fear. And yet, as I stacked dishes in the sink later that night, I knew one chapter remained. Ethan had been silenced by the courts, humbled by the loss of his career, forced into classrooms where no one cared about his shine. But storms like his don't disappear overnight. They wait circling, looking for a crack in the walls built against them. My story with him wasn't written in glitter anymore. It was written in patience, in boundaries, in the quiet certainty that no matter what he tried next, he no longer held the stage. What I didn't know then was how close the final curtain truly was. The months after Ethan's plea deal felt like stepping into a quieter season of life. For the first time, in what seemed like forever, I could come home without checking the locks twice or scanning the street for shadows. My apartment was filled with boxes I had finally unpacked, books stacked neatly on shelves, sweaters folded into drawers. It wasn't just a space, it was a home that belonged only to me. The silence there no longer pressed heavy against my chest. It breathed with me, calm and steady. My family began to settle back into its rhythm as well. Bethany, though exhausted from long shifts, carried herself with a glow that came from doing what she loved. Grace, as always, had her wit at the ready, her teasing light but warm. Even my father seemed lighter, his quiet presence filled with pride rather than worry. And my mother, who had stood beside me through every storm, often smiled with a softness that told me she was finally at peace, knowing I was safe. Our dinners together sounded different now. Laughter, unbroken conversation, free from the tension that once lingered. As for Ethan, the last I heard was that his life had narrowed to court-mandated classes and temporary jobs that came and went. His social media, once a daily spectacle, had turned into filtered photos paired with captions about new chapters and lessons learned. I didn't need to follow them to know he was still performing for an empty room. The important truth was that it no longer touched me. His collapse belonged to him, and I didn't have to carry it. I often found myself thinking back to that night at Bethany's graduation dinner. The shine of his suit, the hush that fell when he entered, the words he threw like stones at my sister. For a long time, I replayed it with regret, wondering if I could have done something different. But now, I saw it clearly. That was the night the cracks split open, the night I chose not to chase him out the door. It was the first step toward reclaiming myself. The hardest lesson was understanding how easily I had mistaken hunger for confidence. I had believed his noise was strength, his constant need for the spotlight, a kind of boldness. But real strength isn't loud. It doesn't need to steal from others to shine. True confidence is quiet, steady, unshaken by silence. It leaves room for others to celebrate, and it finds joy in someone else's moment. That was something Ethan could never grasp, but something I had learned the hardest way possible. Bethany's words often echoed in my mind. "You chose yourself," she had said, and she was right. I chose to step out of his orbit, to put down the weight of his chaos, to let the truth stand on its own. It wasn't about revenge or victory. It was about dignity, about walking forward without fear, about claiming the kind of life where laughter at a family table rings clear and unbroken. Looking back now, I realize storms don't always end with thunder. Sometimes they end with silence, when the noise fades, when the stage goes dark, when you finally see that the storm has passed and you're still standing. That's the kind of ending that brings peace, not drama. It leaves you stronger, wiser, and gentler with yourself. Before we close, I'd love to know what part of this journey spoke most deeply to you. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like to hear more true family stories, stay connected here.